Live.
Hello, and welcome to the first out of two MEX Season 32 Presidential Debates. I'm your moderator, Ben Poliphile. Tonight's debate will be held in Massey Arena in Pueblo, Colorado, and it'll be broadcasted by MEX CBS. We thank both the venue and the broadcaster. So before everything, let's meet the candidates. These two men have waged long-term campaigns over the past week, both eagerly fighting for the highest office in the land. One of them will be the next president of the United States, the commander-in-chief and the face of the nation to the world. So without further ado, here they are. To your left, we have Democratic nominee Robert Sanders of New Hampshire, former president of the United States, former representative, former senator, and former vice president under Quentin Lewis. And to your right is Republican nominee Roman Thaddeus of Texas, the former Senate President pro tempore, former senator from Jefferson, representative, candidate for vice president in season 30, and former CIA director. The rules for the candidates which have been agreed to prior to this debate are as follows. In the terms of time, every candidate gets 1 minute for opening and closing statements. For every response, candidates get 1 minute and 45 seconds. For follow-ups, also known as rebuttals, every candidate gets half a minute. Any candidate can follow up a certain maximum number of times, and that is 5 times. You can follow up to any answer unless it is an opening or closing statement or one specific question to which we shall say you cannot have a rebuttal. The order of questioning was randomly decided by the roll of dice. These candidates in their questioning shall take turns. As for an example, Robert Sanders, let's say, answers a question first, and then the next question will be answered first by Mr. Thaddeus. Any candidate can ask once in the entire debate for an up to 5-minute break before the question has been asked, and after all of the answering and follow-ups on the last question ended. The candidates shall not interrupt each other or the moderator, and if the candidates go out of their time, they will hear a sound played. However, if the sound doesn't work, the candidate will be interrupted by the moderator. Today's questions will be answered as follows. First comes former Senator Thaddeus, who will just be called by Mr. Thaddeus, and then former President Sanders, who will be called by Mr. Sanders. They'll take turns in every round. So, first of all, we would like to begin with opening statements from each candidate, which will take roughly 1 minute. A coin toss has determined that Senator Thaddeus will go first. Senator Thaddeus?
Thank you, Ben. You know, this is my first debate, and this has the potential to be one of the greatest debates in MEC history. Two choices that cannot be starker, cannot be more different on where they stand. What I want to do tonight is to show you why our worlds are different and why you should choose our movement on Friday. It's a question of what world do you want to live in? My America is one where we cut taxes on the middle class and eliminate the second income tax bracket, slash the VAT, strengthen Social Security, and create free electronic tax filing, along with other promises you can read in our 17-page platform. My vision is one where we preserve freedom, liberty, and grow our economy through the free market while preserving a strong social safety net for the unfortunate. I bring something new to the table, which is a change from the status quo, a change in the course. In the world Robert presents, which I have the utmost respect for, 14 of 32 MEX seasons will be governed by only 4 individuals if he were to win on Friday. If he won, 3 straight presidents would be going over 2 terms from a constitutional standpoint. In my opinion, that's not healthy for this community. I promise to bring new, bold leadership to the White House. And that's why I hope you choose the better bargain for America on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thaddeus. Now we will move on to former President Sanders.
Thank you, Ben. Roman, thank you for being here. People, thank you for attending and watching. This campaign is about establishing a system that represents what we want America to be in the 21st century. In a time with record unemployment numbers and high consumer confidence, our suicide rates continue to skyrocket, and rates of depression and anxiety are at record highs. With such low unemployment rate, people still cannot get enough hours with the jobs that they have and are struggling to make ends meet with 2 or more places of employment. Our nation is changing, our economy is transforming, And if we want to create well-paying jobs, if we want to decrease our reliance on Chinese goods, if we want to eliminate our reliance on foreign oil, we can, but not with the solutions of the past. I have always tried to think out of the box. When I ran for president in 2019, I chose someone from the opposite party as my running mate, or as the opposite party as me, as my running mate, something which was a shock to many at the time, but laid the groundwork for future presidential campaigns, including mine in this election and Mr. Thaddeus's. Those late night policy calls every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday were essential for crafting thought out legislation that's based on the intent of change. It allowed the admin to work proactively as opposed to coming up with some offhand bill because we needed to be doing something or acting in a reactionary measure based off of what the public opinion polls said at the time. If elected again, I will continue to be unorthodox and continue to think outside of the box. My platform that I will outline in this debate and the questions that we will answer here will be the most revolutionary proposals from all sides of the spectrum, bringing together a number of thought trains, a number of people's ideas, and a number of intellectual conversations to create real policy for this country. And with them, we will create a country that works for all Americans. We will create millions of well paying jobs, fix our country's mental health crisis, and create a revolutionary America for the 2020s and beyond, laying the groundwork to maintain our superpower status on the international stage. This campaign is about solutions, and this platform is meant to reflect that. We will continue to add plans and policy proposals to this platform that I'm going to outline in this debate and to the administration that we have, growing with the times and not sticking to our principles just because uh, they are what we believe, because this is a compromise candidacy. At the end of the day, what we must do in this election is elect a president who has the revolutionary ideas needed to save the many crises we face in the future. Yes, I have served as president before, and I hope we don't have a 20-minute long conversation on that issue. Uh, People know where I stand on term limits, so I'm not going to even mention that. But the fact of the matter is, we have a healthcare crisis. The fact of the matter is, there's a housing crisis. The fact of the matter is, the American people, the working class uh, uh, people of this country, are in deep crises, personal crises. And what they need is a leader to bring them out of that personal crises, lower their personal expenses, make sure that they have more money in their pocket at the end of the day, and that the wealth of this nation, of this most productive and industrious nation in the world, is not being pooled at the top 1% managerial class of the country and is being distributed to the labor force. That's what this candidacy is about. That's what my administration will be about. We're going to change this country. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today. I look forward to going on and on about the issues and back and forth with Mr. Thaddeus. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. That lasted a little over a minute, but
Well,
I think we can.
I was waiting for the sound. You gotta.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. The sound.
I
The
just kept
sound
Don't worry.
going,
You know
and
what?
I had written a minute, and then
No, that's fine.
where's
That's
the
fine.
soundboard, Mr. Mo?
That's we'll get the soundboard. It's not working at the moment,
Okay.
but we'll
Bruh.
get that. Anyway, let's move on to our first round of questions. Um, after those opening statements, the candidates will be allowed to give rebuttals to each other. Um, let's get to our first round of questions, which is domestic policy and the ever contentious issue of healthcare. The nation has been grappling with an intense and unyielding healthcare debate over the past few weeks, with large protests on the left and the right for their preferred healthcare plan, and mudslinging across both chambers of Congress. As president, what specific plan of healthcare would you support, and why do you believe it would be the most effective for the American people? Mr. Sanders, we'll start with you.
Well, I've been very clear throughout my entire career of what I support and what my principles are. I believe in a single-payer healthcare system. That'll be the first thing that we get done in my administration is passing through what will be the most progressive House that this community has ever seen or has seen in a while at least, and the Senate, Medicare for all. The single-payer healthcare system that will lower personal expenses for all people and will guarantee health coverage across the board, rebuilding our rural healthcare services and doing so much more to maintain the health of our citizens because that is the most important. My principles on the matter is that the basic needs of the American people must be met in the 21st century when we have so much wealth in the country where we can do this. It just takes a reallocation of funds and a person who will look outside the box to budget, uh, excuse me, accordingly. Uh, what I will do when it comes to healthcare is not only help the House caucus pass that bill, but ensure that where we can, we compromise to ensure that we get that passed. But what we will not compromise on is everybody will have health care. Everybody will get services, and at the end of the day, when you go to the hospital, is that my time?
Yes, that's your time.
Okay, well,
Sorry, I was just about to interrupt that. Um, anyway, Senator Thaddeus, your thoughts on this question?
Thank you, Ben. This is, of course, a very important question and the centerpiece of much debate in this country. My personal stance on this may be towards further privatization of the system. However, that's not what I want to do as president, because I believe the system we currently have in place, the FitzCare public option, I believe that that's an effective compromise to keep, and I think that's a system that can work and that both sides can at least share some sort of agreement on. I don't think the system that former President or Mr. Sanders proposes is a compromise. I don't see it that way. I think that the system we have now is perfectly fine as is, and we should keep it this way because I think that it works, it can cover everyone, and I think that it is something that both parties can at least live with in this side of the healthcare debate. That's really all I really have to say on this matter.
is that much? Is
Well, Roman ended his question, so if you have any,
I do.
if you have,
So
yes, if you have a rebuttal, Mr. Sanders, please go ahead.
So, Mr. Thaddeus, the fact of the matter is we are in a healthcare crisis where millions of Americans do not have healthcare, and you are standing on the national stage saying that you will maintain the status quo and that both parties can live with the current system. I supported FitzCare, and I advised President Fitzgerald on that bill because it was a compromise. But the fact of the matter is FitzCare is not working for the millions of Americans that don't have care right now, and the millions more that are underinsured and their quality of care is going down because they are undercovered. What we is that
That is your time. Thank you for your response. Mr. Thaddeus. Yes, you can rebut that, Mr. Thaddeus.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sanders, I suggest that you take up a talk with Mr. Fitzgerald himself, because he says that this bill covers everyone. Now, is he telling the truth? We don't know on that. He could be. You could be right. He could be right. But unless if we get some sort of update from the moderators, which we would love to see, Ben, it's hard to really tell because care is a system that certainly has the potential to cover everyone. And personally, it is a compromise that I can support, I can live with. But your system, the system that is the devil incarnate to many conservatives, I don't think they're going to catch that libertarians, etc.
Mr. Thaddeus, that's your time. Mr. Sanders, yes, you can rebut that.
Thank you. I don't think that the American people really care what is the devil incarnate to conservatives. What they care is about getting health coverage. And under the Sanders administration, we will cover every American with quality health care. We will rebuild up the rural health care services of the country. And at the end of the day, we have a fundamental disagreement on the matter, and we could go back and forth on it all day, but one of us is going to maintain the status quo under which the healthcare crisis is happening right now, and the other will make bold, progressive change in the other direction to guarantee healthcare and rebuild our nation's healthcare services.
Mr. Sanders, that is your time. Mr. Thaddeus, did you want to rebut that again, or because this is the last chance at a rebuttal, would you like to do so, Mr. Thaddeus?
Sure. I think that there isn't really much to say here because we could go on and on, back and forth, but all I have to say is that there is a large portion of this country. The last poll said that only 34% of citizens in MEC want your single-payer healthcare system. I think that that's not the democratic mandate you've earned, and that's not what the people want. They are fine with the current system. They can live with it. And this healthcare crisis that you talk about, I have seen protests, but I haven't seen the numbers for it. So when you're talking about millions and millions of Americans, I need to see that from the mods, not from you. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, that is our final chance at a rebuttal on the specific question. However, we do have a subset of questions. First of all, Mr. Thaddeus, you are the Republican nominee for President of the United States and therefore have a responsibility to represent them on a national level. There have been many claims by Democrats that congressional Republicans are stonewalling healthcare and that they're not really cooperating that much. Would you be willing, how do you respond to that? And would you be willing to compromise with the potential Democratic majority House if they asked for a more left-wing approach to healthcare?
So here's the thing, right? I think that on this particular issue, we need compromise. Okay, there isn't, and I think that that's something that FitzCare was able to accomplish. However, I think that we also have to keep in mind that we can't abandon our principles on this issue. But to answer your question, I would absolutely be willing to work with a left-wing Congress on a healthcare compromise that can work for all Americans. I think that these accusations of Republican stonewalling in the Congress, they produced a healthcare bill, which personally I would rather keep the system we currently have as a compromise. If the Democrats don't like the system that the Republicans are proposing, well, I say let's bring the Democrats to the table. I want to work with everyone. I want to be the bipartisan president, not a left-wing president who doesn't care what conservatives think. Okay, I care what conservatives and liberals think alike, and I want to bring them together to issue a comprehensive healthcare solution, and that's what I'm going to do under my administration.
Okay, thank you for your response. Mr. Sanders, would you like to rebut that?
Well, yes. No, I just move on to the next question. It's not worth it.
Okay, then. Well, our next question is for Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, as you're a potential Democratic president, you certainly have a shot at being the president of the United States. If you get into that post, would you be willing to work with, as you know, the Senate is primarily made up of conservative members at the moment. Would you be willing to work with them to get your preferred healthcare passed, or would you oppose their stance on it?
I would be willing to work with conservative members of the legislature in any capacity that we can, but when the Republican proposal requires co-payments, deductibles, cost sharing, out-of-pocket expenses, high premiums, lowers the FPL to 145%, and so much more, while ours eliminates co-payments, deductibles, out-of-pocket expenses, and reduces the FPL rate, or keeps the FPL rate at 175% while reducing out-of-pocket expenses for the reducing and eliminating out-of-pocket expenses for the middle-class Americans. We are not going to compromise on issues such as that. What compromise is you come to the table with your principles and you negotiate based on that. It's not conceding or abdicating your principles just because it looks good, and I will not be doing that under my administration. Half of the Democratic Party, and this was proven by the Democratic primary, is a blue dog, conservative-ish, moderate wing of the party. I have to work with them in order to get policy done too. I have to work with the conservatives to get policy done too. The president, no matter what party he has next to his name on the ballot, has to work with every American to ensure that we get being told my mic has to be turned up. Has to work with every American to ensure that we get comprehensive solutions that are tangibly beneficial for the working class and the proletariat of the country. That's what my administration will be about, and just because conservatives may disagree with some of my platform does not mean that we can't work with conservatives on a number of issues, as we'll talk about when we get into foreign policy, individual liberty,
Yes.
the reduction of the federal government, increasing the power of provincial governments, and so much more.
Thank you. That is, thank you for your response, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, do you have a rebuttal to that towards that?
Yeah, sure. Here's what I have to say about this, is that Robert is going to, if he does become president, he is going to have to amend some of how he works his principles during his administration. Look, I mean, the way Robert is sounding, it seems as if he's distancing himself from compromise that the Republicans want. He could stand in San Francisco in the 1964 Republican convention and say that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Look, I don't necessarily agree with FitzCare, and I definitely don't agree with Medicare for all. But we have to start somewhere. We have to meet our principles in the middle and come together and support a proposal that works for Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thaddeus.
Can I get a rebuttal?
Yes, you can get a rebuttal,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sanders.
To say that I'm opposed to compromise is just quite frankly ridiculous, Mr. Thaddeus. We are in an election. We are supposed to be bringing forth our principles and our full principles so that the American people see where we stand and the honest truth of where we see the world and where we see the world in the 21st century and where the United States should go. When actually governing, that is a much different thing than the election. And you have to govern in a pragmatic way, and I will do that. And I am in no way opposed to compromise. Any of the conservative members of the Democratic Party, Tim Taft, Chase Stevens, a number of other conservatives could say otherwise, and just because you say so in this debate doesn't make it true.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Thaddeus, this is your final chance at a rebuttal. Would you like to do so?
Sure. I'm not saying that Robert is opposed to compromise. I'm saying that I'm closer to the compromise candidate this election. I'm closer to the moderate point where I can agree with more people on the aisle and at least work with them. I'm concerned that if Robert is saying that he can't agree to the parts of the Republicans are going to propose, I'm concerned at what healthcare system are we going to end up with. Are we going to end up with no healthcare system if the Republicans are still in control of the Congress? I can promise you that we are going to keep the system in place because it works for Democrats and it works for Republicans, and that is the system that we must maintain.
Thank you for your response. Now we're going to have to move on to the next question.
Can I get a final?
Sorry, we're out of rebuttals. There's a certain amount, which is 5, and we will have to move on now. So now we're going to move on to the subject of race relations in this country. This has been talked about issue in MEC for a long time. Reforms have been made in both the Congress, but an overwhelming majority still agrees that every ethnicity and race is not being valued nor evaluated by the same by institutions in this country. What do you believe is the culprit for these inequalities, and what will you do as president to attempt to curb it? Mr. Thaddeus, we will begin with you.
Ben, I think that this is a very important question. Race relations is one of the most dividing factors in this country, especially between people on the left and on the right. I think that, of course, one of the major factors, I think, is, of course, racism in this country. That is just something that has always occurred in the United States. And I think that's something Robert and I can agree with. Systemic racism, institutional racism, that's a big problem for race relations in this country. What needs to be done is a solution where, first of all, we need to rebuild the trust between the African-American community and the police, and that we've made great strides in achieving that through comprehensive legislation, body cams, stopping the corruption of our police force, and keeping racist cops out of the people who are supposed to protect us, white or black. And I think that has worked. So over time, we need to make more progress on this issue. It is an issue that will take a long time, of course, to finish. We have a lot of amends to make in this country. But my hope is that we will be able to come to a solution where we can rebuild trust between our services, our institutions, our businesses, and create a harmonious society between all races in this nation. And that's.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, your response now?
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that important question, too. I know I have Bernie Sanders as my profile picture, but I am a black man in the United States of America, and I have firsthand experience with institutional racism, with personal racism, with racism in all forms and oppression in that same sense. What a Sanders administration would do to increase race relations in this country is rebuild the economic trust between the government and the African American and minority communities across this country, because those communities have been, for decades, centuries even, oppressed, exploited, and underfunded by the federal government. Segregation through housing, and so many different issues that we must fix through total economic reform, like prioritizing, sorry, excuse me, lost my train of thought right there. Criminal justice is also an important aspect of this, on top of that community reform, because on top of the exploitation of resources of those communities, they have been over-policed and over-jailed because the prison system needs to uphold its labor standards. And what a Sanders administration would do is prioritize lighter sentencing times, implement high school equivalency programs, fund compassionate drug courts, expand access to vocational training programs, and much more. We'll reduce the financial burden of incarceration by $15 billion, reduce offender reentry, and successfully rehabilitate 605,000 incarcerated Americans. Along with those proposals, we will also fight to eliminate the use of for-profit prisons and encourage provinces to expand the knowledge of law in those schools. This in-depth plan will successfully make the United States both a more fair and safer nation. What we also must do is stop with the rhetoric of, well, I'll do that in the rebuttal then.
Yeah. You ran out of time there. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a rebuttal to that?
Sure. So I would call this less of a rebuttal and more of just a furtherance. I think that when it comes to, first of all, when we're talking about economic justice, one of the biggest parts of my platform is cutting the regressive value-added tax, which I believe hurts all people in the lower economic sectors, because it's a regressive system that I personally believe needs to be significantly cut. And I think that that's how we create economic justice in this country. On the issue of criminal justice, I think that, of course, we need to reform our prison system and hold up the standards that our prison should be. I'm out of time. So, yeah.
Can I get a rebuttal to that?
Yes, Mr. Sanders.
Thank you. Going back to what Roman said in the beginning, the argument of building trust between black communities and the police, that argument has been used by conservatives and moderate members of the government and politicians for so long, because that is the only thing that can be said for race relations by people who don't understand the economic impact on race relations for these communities. What we must do is rebuild these communities and bring equity to all the. Yeah, that's my time.
I see. Mr. Thaddeus, this is, you can rebuttal. Would you like to do so?
No, you know what? Let's move on.
Okay, that sounds good.
Well, there's more rebuttal time though, is there?
There's 5 potential rebuttals, but I think it has to keep going successfully for there to be continued debate on this subject, unless, Mr. Sanders, you would like a rebuttal time to further speak on this.
I guess not. It's okay.
Okay. Next is the newly contentious issue of presidential term limits. The community is extremely fractured on how to go about this subject, and there are several political and legal conflicts arising around this issue. Disregarding the potential ramifications on this presidential election for a second, what is your current stance on the issue? And as president, what would you push for Congress to pass, if anything, regarding term limits? Mr. Sanders, we will start with you.
Well, Congress failed to pass an official amendment to the Constitution, so that fault lies with the Republican caucus in both chambers. However, I think if the community really was opposed to another term of my presidency, then I wouldn't have gained the amount of support that we've gotten in the past couple of months, or past couple of days, I guess it wouldn't be real life. Now believing in term limits is a perfectly valid opinion, and but there is so much more here at stake that I think we should be making this issue about policy and our records instead of spending time debating an issue that both of us and the audience know our positions on quite clearly. Um, Not about discrediting my campaign or hijacking this election with a single issue. If people are really against another term of a Sanders presidency, they have the right to express that opinion at the ballot box. However, I think a majority of people share both my concerns about both my concerns about a Thaddeus presidency as well as my vision for the future, and will be able to receive a resounding mandate come this Saturday because of that. Instead of spending time on this issue, as I said before, let the American people decide at the ballot box who they want to be their president, because they have the decision. The argument's been made that if we have another fourth term, then it'll be a dictatorship. This is not a dictatorship. We are in an election. The American people will make the decision based on our policy, our vision, and our worldview, and if we can't stand here and say that instead of debating the silly issue of term limits when we've just had a president who served 4 terms, then what are we doing here?
Okay, thank you for your response, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, your response?
Sure. This is I think, a very important question. I personally have been a long time supporter of term limits. And I think that this is not just as a country, but as a community. If Robert Sanders is elected, I said this in my opening statement, 14 of 32 seasons will be governed by 4 people. I don't think that's right for our community, and I don't think that's healthy for our democracy. I think that we need different visions for this country. Robert has been president 3 terms. 3 terms. That's 24 weeks. And he can't get done a 21-page platform in that time because he got a lot done in his terms, sure. But he has 21 more pages to do. I mean, he couldn't have done this before. I think that I'm going to get done in 1 term, my entire 17-page platform. What Robert couldn't get done in his 21-page platform, plus that page platform, plus whatever he ran for on his first one. Because we need real change in this country. That is why I firmly support a term limit. We need to bring this because this is about the health of the community.
Thank you, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, like a rebuttal?
Yes. The fact of the matter is, as president, the legislative process takes a minute. When you have a vision for the future, and I was very clear about this in all 3 of my elections, you cannot expect to get that entire vision done. As we just said in the conversation for compromise, Mr. Thaddeus, I'm not going to do a hypothetical that I could do more than you. That's a silly hypothetical that I think the American people know is not fruitful or productive for the conversation moving forward.
That's your time, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a rebuttal?
Yeah, I mean, don't give me that. Legislation can pass within 4 days, right? It goes up for debate in the House, passes the House, goes up for debate in the Senate, passes the Senate, signed by the president. It's not that hard, okay? I think that if you're going to run an effective government, you got to get things done. So either Robert has ran ineffective governments in the past or not. But I think that when it comes to this issue, we have to very much consider, why do we need another term of what has been tried and what has been tried and why?
Thank you for that, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, would you like another rebuttal?
I wouldn't call adding nearly 25 million jobs with the reforestation program, working with Kenneth Quinones under my first administration, nor reforming the United States foreign policy, nor passing the INDA, nor passing the NDD, nor passing education reform, nor passing any of the other things, an inadequate form of governance. Just because I didn't pass my entire 21-page platform doesn't mean I am not an effective leader. I think that's a ridiculous standard. You've been in the Senate for weeks, as well as a slew of other positions. But by that standard, why haven't you gotten all the goals you stand here today done? It's a ridiculous standard, and it's a standard that must not be used when talking about actual governance.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a final rebuttal towards that?
Yes, and I'm very glad that Robert Sanders brought up Congress, because when I was in the Senate, I was able to get a lot of things that I wanted to get done in my presidential term done. But, however, let's take a look at Robert's time in the Senate and the House. I think, and personally, in my opinion, I don't remember in the latter part of his Senate term him sitting on donkey's rear, not really doing much in the Senate. The latter half of his Senate term and a lot of his House term, he didn't really get much done. And I think that when it comes to what I've done in the Senate, I was able to pass dozens of pieces of legislation, at least get them on the House floor. And that's what I want to do as president, get my entire platform done.
When I ran for the, I assume my rebuttal time.
Yes, one more rebuttal and then we're
When
done.
I ran for the House, I ran under a platform of foreign policy and working with the Speaker and the President under the issue of foreign policy. I was in the foreign policy committees, and we created the Subcommittee of Peace, in which we worked on a number of treaties that were passed under the Fitzgerald administration and worked on the Iran crisis and the China crisis. I did not say I was going to pass my presidential agenda in the House. I was very explicit in my election that I am running for one term to serve and help fix the foreign policy issues we did, and we did that, and I served my term successfully. I am not at all unproud of my record in my last term as representative.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Now we're going to have to move on to the next question. And over the past 30 years, America's quote-unquote war on drugs has proceeded at a breakneck pace across all 52 states and now extends southwards into countries such as Mexico, Guatemala, and Colombia. In MEC, a part of this issue was solved by legalization of certain drugs, which you, Mr. Sanders, supported. Mr. Thaddeus, you haven't been a big fan of such legal actions. However, you do talk about the opioids and drugs in your campaign. Using the Jefferson cocaine epidemic as an example, how would you as president reconcile situations in which the law allows for such epidemics to happen? Mr. Thaddeus, we'll start with you.
Right. So when it comes to the matter of drugs, right, I think that personally we have to treat this as a health issue, right? I think that the people affected by the consumption of drugs, we shouldn't be locking them up in prison. I think that the significant strides and reforms have been made to be able to support those people. However, when it comes to the dealers and the suppliers, they need to be locked up, okay? It should not be legal to come in, cross the border into the country, sell your drugs, which could be laced with almost anything. Now, those people do need to be arrested. But when you have folks who are with these certain addictions, that is a health problem. And I would expand on rehabilitation legislation in this country, promote rehab. And I think that the best thing we can do for this country and to solve this epidemic is focus on this as a health issue and not a criminal issue. And I'm glad to know, I think that Robert would agree with me here.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders?
Yes, well, I do agree with the policy that was put in place, decriminalizing a whole lot of drugs, and I did push for that policy in my first term. It was funny to see people that opposed that supporting it, but that's neither here nor there. What we're going to do under a Sanders administration is, and I concur with Roman, and I'm glad he agrees with this, treat the addiction crisis as a public health issue. And when we do that, we can reform. This will be a part of criminal justice reforms. We will be removing a lot of the nonviolent prisoners who are in jail for misdemeanor drug crimes. We will be, which will clear up our prisons and make the police have a much better job at collecting the people that Roman talked about, the drug suppliers, the drug manufacturers. And when we decriminalize drugs, and we'll see this over time once this policy has been laid out for a longer period of time, those drug manufacturers and the black market will start to decrease, as has been the case in Portugal with the decrease in organized crime, because organized crime is fueled by drugs, which was started largely in part because of American foreign policy towards South America and the Middle East. So coupled with the Sanders doctrine on foreign policy, the Sanders doctrine on domestic policy and the economic reforms, and our healthcare policy, treating addiction as a public health crisis, which is so important to the single-payer healthcare program that we will be bringing in. We will be reforming this issue on a number of cases, bringing down organized crime, bringing down drug rates, bringing down addiction rates, and saving millions of people's lives by reforming our thought process on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a rebuttal to that?
Sure. This is, of course, I see that there's little disagreement on this issue. I think that we have to go after organized crime. We need to cut intervention in our foreign policies that can create these messes. Look, a Thaddeus presidency, and I have served as the FBI director. I know what it is like to go after criminals. I've served as the attorney general. This needs to be done. Okay, these drugs have affected my home province of Jefferson. That we saw the cocaine splash happen right in the epicenter in Florida. And I think that this is a solution that we have to going after those cartels.
Thank you, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders?
Yes, I hope Mr. Thaddeus would not disagree with me in saying that continuing the war on drugs in policing organized crime is not the effective method in decreasing organized crime. As I previously stated, the effective method in decreasing organized crime is getting rid of the black markets that fuel the organized crime and fuel the wealth that these criminal organizations can amass on an international scale. We can do this in a number of ways, but
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Your time is up. I think, unless Mr. Thaddeus, you'd like a rebuttal, I think we're going to move on to the next question. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like to use your rebuttal?
No, there's quite strong agreement here. I agree that the war on drugs is a failure, and I think that we can move on.
All right, thank you. This is a pretty philosophical question that's coming next, but does every law-abiding citizen have the right have a right to food, a right to shelter, a right to education, and a right to health care provided by the federal government specifically? Otherwise stated, does the U.S. government owe each person a house, a meal, a college degree, and a health care? Mr. Sanders, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I believe intrinsically it is my principle that the basic needs of all humans in such a wealthy nation must be met when we have the resources to do so. Is that through the federal government in every means? No. And this is a huge part of my platform. Where we can, we must decrease the power of the presidency. We must decrease the power of the federal government and bring it to the provinces to ensure that implementation of such programs and of such implementation of the providing of the basic needs for those Americans happens on a good time scale and effectively. That can best be done by the governors and the state legislatures with the backing of the federal government. Not the oversight of the federal government, although that will be the case in some places, but the backing of the federal government, the financial backing of the federal government, because the federal government is where most of our wealth lies, and we must use that power to create this new government. My policies, as outlined in my platform and in my agenda, do the premise of the question in an effective, tangible manner that involves all sides of the spectrum through many policy conversations, and we will get that done under a Sanders administration.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Thaddeus, your response?
Sure. So, of course, I am very glad to hear Robert arguing for provincial rights and the decreasing size of the federal government and the executive branch of the office of the president. However, I would, when it comes to the right of government supplements and what the government gives out, for example, I'd like to bring up, Robert's guaranteed minimum income plan, which is modeled off of the Alaskan system, a system which is funded by Alaskan oil, which is likely strongly phased out under the reforms made by Robert, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I'm just pointing it out that plan, might not be entirely reliable. But when it comes to this issue of what the government provides, yes, we need to decrease the role of the federal government, let the provinces be able to provide for their citizens, but also we need to make sure that the government in general is decreased. And that's why I support tax cuts. Instead of cutting defense spending, and cutting taxes at the same time. I'm not a big supporter of paternalistic government, and I think that we need to absolutely decrease the size of the federal government and let the people decide in each province and their communities and their municipalities and their school boards what they need to do within those communities.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, would you like to rebut that?
Yes, specifically for the UBI program. My UBI minimum guaranteed income program, or the UBI program, would be establishing an Alaskan-style American social wealth fund called the American Prosperity Fund, using increased revenue from an increased capital gains tax, which would not increase taxes, on the middle class Americans or working class Americans that do not need a tax increase, that do not need more expenses to the federal government or more expenses to private industries to pay for basic needs. And under a Sanders administration, we will cut those private expenses, we will cut those federal expenses, and middle class Americans will be paying a lot less in taxes, personal expenses, and overall, putting more money into their
Thank,
pockets so they can spur local governments, local municipalities, growing our communities,
thank you, Mr.
and
Sanders.
providing the wealth necessary to provide the basic necessities for every American in this country, as we should do moving into the 21st century, as has been done in a
Thank you,
number
Mr.
of other countries.
Thank you, Mr.
I can see the soundboard didn't work.
The soundboard did work, except I don't think it was heard. But anyway, Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a rebuttal?
Yeah, sure. So, responding to this point, first of all, I'm looking at your platform, and I just can't quite find the number for the cost. So, I'd like to know just, specifically how much is this going to cost, and what percentage of that is going to be paid for by these different methods. That's point one. Point two, my philosophy: let's just give back to the American people with a direct tax cut. Cut the VAT, cut the cost of spending money on consumer goods. And let's also cut income taxes. That's why part of my platform is eliminating the second tax bracket. Robert's plan, I think, is I'm out of time. So,
Yes. Mr. Sanders, would you like a rebuttal again?
It's not worth it to go back and forth on these issues, as has been stated in a number of other questions. But I would like to ask the specific question: Why did you change your position on the VAT when you voted against it, and now are voted for it and are now in support against this program?
So if you're talking specifically about the budget issue, okay, so here we go with the issue of flip-flopping. We love to hear this. So first of all, I support a VAT.
No, actually, just to clarify, I'm not calling you a flip-flopper. I'm simply asking why you changed your position on the VAT from voting for it to now not supporting it.
Okay, well, thank you for cutting me off. But I've never supported a VAT. The only reason I've supported that budget is because that I thought it was fairly sensible in terms of being a compromise. It had tax cuts, it had spending cuts, and I think that it was working. And it works for the American people. However, still, there needs to be progress made. Just because it isn't my ideal doesn't mean I flat out nay it. I can work for compromise. I can get things done in the Congress, and that's what I will do under my administration. That's why we need to cut the VAT, cut taxes for every American. I have never, ever changed my position on the VAT. I am firmly opposed to it, and we need to cut it down. We will cut it down to 10% from 28% because it is fiscally unsustainable to eliminate the whole thing, because I support a balanced budget.
Thank you, Senator Thaddeus. We're now going to move on to the next question. I appreciate the little tangent there, but we have
well, every debate needs one. Every debate needs at least one tangent. Come on.
Yeah. So next, we have a question. The first question goes to Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Thaddeus, you are an aggressive supporter of lowering taxes on quote-unquote middle-class families. However, as we know, lowering taxes also comes with making the decision of which agencies to cut spending from in the budget, which brings its own tough decisions. As president, how would your budget look, and do you plan to decrease taxes on the average American, as you say, in a way which is responsible?
Well, if I didn't think it was responsible, I wouldn't support that policy. The truth is, what we're going to do is we are going to eliminate the second income tax bracket. We are going to cut the third bracket in half, and we're also going to cut the fourth bracket and have the VAT. Now, this is going to cost a fair share of money, about $365 billion. How I am going to pay for that is going to be through a combination of cuts to defense spending, getting out of wars, and because I believe in a more non-interventionist foreign policy, and also cuts to discretionary spending, because I think that our government needs to become less paternalistic, and we should cut spending in certain categories while also making sure that we preserve our strong social safety nets in fields such as Social Security, which I plan to increase funding for. So we will pay for tax cuts and we will pay for Social Security increases with cuts to defense spending and cuts to discretionary spending. I will not touch mandatory spending, and I will never, ever cut Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. I can promise you that.
Thank you, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, this question goes to you. Mr. Sanders, you're pretty much on the other side of this issue. Simply put, you believe in higher taxes in order to provide governmental plans which cover people's health, social care, education, housing, as well as shelter. You say you consider all these things to be right. However, we know that such tax increases mean higher taxes for most Americans and most of American income. In order to achieve these goals, how would you raise the taxes, and would you raise them on Americans who aren't in the top 5% of the income bracket?
Would Americans that are making $100,000 a year pay a little bit more in taxes? Yes, but overall, their personal expenses would go down. That's just the simple fact of the matter. It's been done a number of times in government's history, and what we must do is decrease personal expenses, as I've outlined a number of times in this debate. The foundation for the plans that I outline has been put in place by the Kirkman administration, by the Fitzgerald administration, by my past Sanders administrations, by the Evans administration, the Brown administration, and Democratic administrations, so on and so forth down the line, that have put in place budgets that allow for these fundamental reforms to be put in place. The funding for which in each of these plans is outlined pretty clearly in Brett and I's platform. And what we must do is ensure that Americans have more money in their pocket at the end of the day. So if they're paying more in taxes, but you're paying less overall, that's a deal that Americans can take, especially when you're being provided with the services that will guarantee basic needs for the Americans that don't have it and the Americans that are lacking the foundation to provide themselves and their families with those basic needs.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. I don't believe I gave Mr. Sanders a chance to rebut Roman's comments, but I think we're just going to move on in that case because I don't want to be unfair towards one candidate and give them time that the other candidate didn't get. So our next question goes out to both candidates. Over the years, the United States has been heavily involved in global trade agreements such as NAFTA, CUFTA, TPP, and others. In MEC, many of these agreements have been renegotiated by multiple presidents, most recently President Kirkman and President Fitzgerald. Where do you stand on the topic of trade, and which of these and more agreements do you support or oppose, and why? Mr. Sanders, we'll start with you.
Well, I supported the renegotiations as they stand because I was a part of a lot of those negotiations and a part of creating a lot of those trade deals. My philosophy when it comes to trade is increasing it as much as possible because it is good for the global economy as a whole. But what we must do is ensure that workers and the people being affected by those trade deals are at the table when we are crafting those trade deals so that they aren't being shafted that they aren't being shafted by those trade deals, which has happened in the past, not past MEC administrations, but past administrations in real life. And we must ensure that this doesn't happen, as has happened under NAFTA and so on and so forth. What we must do is create less reliance on Chinese trade by increasing our cooperation with the African Union, increasing cooperation with Southeastern Asian countries, and combating China's sphere of influence when it comes to the geopolitical stage. I have done this already as president. I have coordinated this effort as acting Secretary of State under the Evans-Kirkman administration. I have done this in the Subcommittee of Peace, and I will continue this work in my new administration, increasing our reliance with India and so on and so forth, which will put America in the position to not only maintain its superpower status on the global stage, but increase it, totally dominating the world in the 21st century and laying the foundation to make America great again.
Well, I like what you did there, Robert. But anyway,
well, I had to put it in once.
Mr. Thaddeus, your response to the question, and then we can get to rebuttals.
Sure. So my stance is personally, I'm a free trader. Free trade improves the economy and it lowers prices for consumers. However, of course, there has to be a seat at the table for unions and those who want to make sure that they don't get completely screwed over in some sort of bad trade deal for them. Okay, our trade deals need to work for unions, and that's why I think Robert brought up a point about China. The Belt and Road Initiative, that's China's plan for their whole trade initiative with Africa, with Asia. And that needs to be absolutely curtailed with their own counter Belt and Road Initiative. And that's why we need a strong trade deal with the African Union. I know there's been some great progress on that sector. We need to be promoting, we need to stop and halt Chinese expansion into Africa. And the best way to do that is through foreign investment, through working with these countries to establish various investments that can really work, that can work for us, that can work for them, and of course counter and isolate China in their place, keep them in their place so that we don't have to worry about a future where China's red flag, like, should I say in the cases of Kenya, Nigeria, and Madagascar under the Sanders administration, where a red flag is flying over those countries.
Thank you, Senator Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders.
Well, I'm just going to reiterate that in light of growing threats across the world, whether that be in China, the Middle East, or anywhere, ultimately we must recognize that confusing our foreign policy agenda with personal squabbles at home is a mistake of disastrous proportions. We are a family, and though families might get in fights, when there is an outside threat to our well-being, we must stand united against it. United, just like the revolutionaries were against the British Crown, and so many other revolutions across the world. Conflict often leads to destruction of liberty, and liberty can strive when there is peace in our world. My foreign policy is based on the principle that experience and pragmatism is a necessity to great foreign policy, but that it can be used for noble goals or destructive ones. Our place as leaders of the free world is to advocate for peace wherever possible and to bring attention to the blossoming freedom wherever it may be found. That will be the Sanders Doctrine, plain and simple.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders.
May I rebut?
Yes, you can have rebuttal, Mr. Thaddeus.
Robert, you talk about standing up to China, but during your first term, you sat down when the Madagascar crisis erupted, when there was a Chinese-backed coup in that region of the world. What did you do? You did nothing. You did nothing, and you let a democratically elected pro-U.S. leader get executed by a Chinese coup. Is that standing up for the United States? It is absolutely not. No, my administration will make sure that we did do something appropriate in that scenario, like going to the United Nations and making sure that we can get a peacekeeping force on the ground. What did our administration do? You sat down and you didn't stand up to China, so I don't want to hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders?
When it came to China invading the South China Sea and the Situation Room, I advocated for bringing Navy troops in there to stop Chinese intervention into that place. When it came to trade, I advocated and helped pass with Grover as trade representative a trade bill that decreased the sphere of influence of China. And when it comes to Madagascar, I have publicly apologized a number of times, including in the past 2 presidential elections, for that mistake. And the fact that you have to point out something from a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now,
Robert, are you
to
gonna
come
keep
up
going
with
over your time?
Mr. Thaddeus, that's not necessary. I can handle that.
Yeah.
Well, Ben,
I think the moderator is doing a fine job, Roman. I mean,
Yes, I understand your concern, Mr. Thaddeus, but I can handle that duty. Mr. Thaddeus, would you like a rebuttal?
No, I think we can move on. Actually, no,
all right.
I would like a rebuttal.
Okay. We will do it.
I think I bring this up because let's compare our history on reacting to China. You sat down when the Madagascar coup happened. What was I doing back in season 21 when I had the chance to face China? I said, and I stood with Secretary Ivor Mestrovich and Trey Cranfield, the defense advisor to President Quinton Lewis, and we said we need to make sure that we secure the South China Sea area to protect against Chinese aggression against Vietnam. Okay? And we were able to do that, and we were able to stand up to the Chinese and push them back, and they retreated. Your administration didn't even retreat because you didn't even get into the battle.
Thank you, Mr. Thaddeus. Mr. Sanders, this is your last chance for rebuttal. Would you like to do so?
Yes. I was a part of that administration, and leaving me out of that decision is an interesting choice when I was on the front battles as vice president, higher status than all of those people that you named out, working directly with Quentin Lewis to oppose China, advocating for the Navy to go into there to stop Chinese ships from entering the South China Sea and taking over that area to protect trade in that area, which is so important to the United States, and to protect Vietnam. I was on the front lines of that issue, and again, I apologize for Madagascar, but leaving me out of history.
Okay, Mr. Thaddeus. Yeah, Mr. Thaddeus, this is your last chance for rebuttal. Would you like to do so?
So first of all, yes, I would like to rebut there because when Robert was vice president, he sided with, I believe, so QJ's first call was to withdraw to Zumwalt and retreat American forces as a sign of weakness. That was a sign of weakness, and I honestly don't remember you in the Situation Room all that much. I might be wrong, but can't bring up the chats now. But I was on the front lines and advocating, along with my good friends in the cabinet, to make sure that we pushed forward. Okay, and that was where I took a stand against China. And what you did during the Madagascar crisis and during then, it just doesn't compare.
Ben.
Thank you for that, Mr. Thaddeus. I appreciate the spirited debate. We'll have to move on to.
He directly attacked my character right there.
Back to work. In your view, how big of a role does the government play, and how big of a role would it play in your ideal world? Please elaborate. Mr. Thaddeus, we'll start with you.
Hold on, Ben. For the stream, you cut out.
Right.
First
so my
half,
belief,
Ben, for the stream,
course, is that business creates jobs. Entrepreneurs create jobs. The government can play a role in this for sure, but their role is to be the middleman between the entrepreneurs.
Oh,
I did not directly attack your character.
I think we're already on the next
the stream
question.
Is,
Sorry about that.
Hold on, the stream is lagging.
Mr. Thaddeus, can you continue? Oh,
you two are lagging in the stream. Yeah.
What?
What about the stream?
Both of your voices are lagging.
What's going on?
That last question, Ben, didn't get.
I think we're still live.
You are still no, bro, guys. We're still live. I'm telling you that last question got cut off, and just re-ask the question.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, you're all fine right now.
Currently?
It's all good right now.
I can
re-ask the question. Yeah.
Okay.
And then Roman will re-answer. So just cut that
I will
off
re-ask
the
the
last
question.
time. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Just take that out of the whole time thing.
When it comes when it comes to putting people back to work, in your view, how big of when it comes to putting people back to work,
jobs,
in your view,
entrepreneurs create jobs because those are the people who are eventually
now. And how big of a role would it play in your ideal world? Please elaborate.
Out.
Mr. Thaddeus, we'll start with you.
Right. Businesses are the backbone. That's what we're going to be able to do. I'm going to do under my administration. Letting business create jobs with strong social safety nets, with strong union, good-paying jobs. That's what we're going to do. Should we take after Robert, let's take a 5-minute break just for like the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Should we do an intermission?
Hold on. Let me just. Is the stream okay at the moment? Sure, we can do an intermission.
It's saying it's fine
Let's-
with me, but
5-minute.
Intermission.
Okay, everybody, 5-minute intermission.
Mhm. Okay.
okay.